Imagine the person you love most in the world has just taken their final breath. The room is silent. The monitors, if there were any, have stopped.
Right.
The medical professionals step back. What is the very first physical thing you were supposed to do? According to the ancient manual we are looking at today, you don't immediately call someone, you don't break down and run out of the room.
No, you walk over to the bed and you immediately tie their jaw shut.
Which is just a stunningly stark image to open with.
It really is, but it perfectly encapsulates what we are dealing with today.
Yeah.
We are looking at the absolute collision of profound grief and, well, immediate, uncompromising physical reality.
Yeah.
And historically, human beings have always struggled with that collision. We cannot cure death, so instead we choreograph it.
And what a choreography it is. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, we are pulling from classical manuals of Islamic jurisprudence. Specifically, we are looking at how medieval scholars codified the absolute end of life in a text detailing the rituals and jurisprudence of Islamic funerals.
Yeah.
And our mission today isn't just to read you a list of ancient rules. We want to uncover the profound philosophy, the intense practicality, and the deep respect for the human condition embedded within these guidelines. Because whether you are religious or not, understanding these rituals offers an absolute masterclass in how human societies use structure to navigate the chaos of grief.
What is endlessly fascinating about these texts is how they refuse to let theology float away into the abstract. Medieval religious scholars were dealing with the messy realities of the physical body.
Right.
They lived in a world without modern refrigeration, without chemical embalming, and without the sanitized distance we currently have from death. So when you read through these pages, you realize very quickly that this isn't just a spiritual guidebook.
No, it's highly sophisticated community organizing.
Yes, it is public hygiene. It is profound psychological closure mapped out step by step for the people left behind.
That is exactly it. It gives the hand something to do when the brain absolutely cannot process what has just happened. So let's step into this world. We are going to start right at the threshold, the transition from life to death.
The very beginning.
Yeah, before any public mourning begins, before the community gathers, there are these immediate, incredibly intimate steps that occur the moment a person is passing.
And the text is meticulously specific about these immediate actions, starting with orientation. Like, the physical position of the dying person in the room is treated with a high degree of importance.
Oh, totally.
The manual specifies turning the dying person toward the Qibla, which is the direction of prayer in the Islamic faith.
And the sources detail exactly how that should ideally happen. Like, the gold standard, according to the text, is laying the person on their right side, facing that direction.
Yes, on the right side. And the text notes a very specific, almost poetic reason for this. It is a mirroring of how they will eventually be placed in the grave.
Wow.
Right. The physical posture of dying mirrors the physical posture of the final rest. It creates this continuity between the bed and the earth. However, this is where we see the first massive injection of pragmatism in the jurisprudence.
Which I loved reading about.
Yeah, the text notes that laying someone on their side might be the tradition, but if a person is physically struggling to breathe, or if laying on their side causes them distress in their final moments, they should be laid on their back with their feet facing the Qibla and their heads slightly elevated.
I found that detail so incredibly humane. Even in the middle of this highly structured, sacred ritual orientation, there is an immediate allowance for the physical comfort of the person suffering. The religious law essentially says, well, the right side is the tradition, but if they are struggling, put them on their back, make it easier for them.
Exactly. It prioritizes the ease of the dying over rigid adherence to the physical posture of the ritual. It acknowledges the biological struggle of the body shutting down. But alongside that physical orientation, there is an intense focus on spiritual anchoring.
Right, the prompting.
Yes, the text mandates that the people in the room prompt the dying person to say the Shahada.
The declaration of faith. There is no God but God.
Correct. The text specifically uses phrasing derived from prophetic tradition. It says, prompt your dying ones to testify that there is no God but God. And think about the psychological comfort of this mechanism.
Yeah, I mean...
You are transitioning out of the known world. Your body is failing. Your senses might be blurring. The panic of the unknown is setting in. And your community, your family sitting beside your bed, they are gently anchoring your final moments of consciousness to your absolute core belief.
It focuses the mind completely away from the terror of the physical failure and toward a singular unifying spiritual truth. It basically gives them a life raft in the middle of the storm.
That's a great way to put it.
But then the breath stops. The life raft is gone. And the text immediately pivots from spiritual comfort to some very stark physical interventions. Which brings us back to what we mentioned at the very beginning, tying the jaw shut and closing the eyes immediately after death.
And it can sound jarring to modern ears.
Right?
It feels clinical, maybe even a little aggressive, to immediately bind a loved one's face the second they pass away.
It really does. You picture a scene of immense sorrow, people crying, and suddenly someone is getting a strip of cloth to tie around the deceased's head. It feels like an intrusion on the grief.
It feels like an intrusion until you connect it to the bigger picture of what the text is actually trying to achieve, which is absolute dignity. The text explicitly states its reasoning for this intervention. It improves the appearance of the deceased.
Because of the biology of it.
Exactly. We have to remember the biology of death.
Yeah.
When a person dies, the muscles completely relax. The jaw slacks open. The eyelids may remain open and unseeing. If rigor mortis sets in while the body is in that state, that contorted expression becomes frozen.
And that would be deeply distressing for the family to witness over the coming hours as they prepare the body.
Precisely. By closing the eyes and securing the jaw immediately, before the muscles stiffen, the community is taking the very first active step to preserve the dignity of the person's physical form. They are preventing the body from appearing grotesque or frightening to the loved ones who will be handling it.
They're curating the final memory for the living, ensuring that the last image the family has is one of peace and rest, not of biological collapse. Which leads us to what is arguably the most intimate, heaviest part of this entire process, the ghusl, the ritual washing. We are moving from the deathbed to the washing table.
And this transition is profound. The text outlines a highly formalized process for purifying the body, and it begins with the physical setup. The body's moved and placed on an elevated bed or a slatted wooden table.
And the text gives a very practical, hygienic reason for that elevation. It is to allow the water to drain away completely. You don't want the body sitting in a pool of the very water that is washing away its impurities.
Exactly. The hygiene protocols here are incredibly strict. But before a single drop of water is poured, before the washing even begins, there is a critical rule that must be observed. And this rule perfectly encapsulates the beautiful tension in this text between complete cleansing and absolute modesty.
The aura.
Yes. The text mandates placing a cloth over the aura, the private parts of the body.
Okay, I want to pause here and really dig into this because this is so incredibly telling about the underlying philosophy of this jurisprudence. You are about to strip a body to wash it thoroughly. It is a dead body. It has no consciousness. It has no ego to be bruised. It doesn't know it's naked. And yet, the text is completely uncompromising about its modesty.
The dignity of the individual absolutely does not evaporate at the moment of death. If anything, reading through this jurisprudence, you get the sense that their dignity is actually heightened because they're now entirely defenseless.
Oh, that's a powerful thought.
The body is treated as a sacred trust. Stripping it completely bare, exposing the genitals to the eyes of the washers, even if those washers are close family members of the exact same sex, is viewed as a profound violation of that dignity.
So they place a cloth over the midsection, but then the text does something incredibly interesting from a legal standpoint. It says that ideally, the entire aura, which is generally considered from the navel down to the knee, should be covered. But it allows for easing this rule to cover just the heavy aura.
Most private, intimate, anatomical parts.
Right, to make the difficult task of washing easier on the living.
And this raises a fascinating point about how classical religious law actually functions in the real world. The text is acknowledging a very stark physical reality. Washing a dead weight, a slippery, unresponsive human body, is exhausting physical labor.
I can't even imagine.
It is. And if law mandates that a massive heavy cloth covering half the body cannot be moved or shifted at all during a deep, thorough scrubbing, it makes the job nearly impossible for the washers. The cloth would get soaked, it would get in the way, it would drag.
So the law flexes.
Exactly. It flexes. It says, maintain the absolute core of the modesty, cover the heavy aura, but we will ease the strictness of the wider boundaries to facilitate the actual cleaning. The text explicitly uses the concept of taision, which means acting out of a desire to make things easy. The jurisprudence refuses to trap the living in an impossible situation.
It's that built-in pragmatism again. So the body is elevated, the modesty is secured beneath the cloth, now comes the washing itself, and the text dictates that it starts with a modified wudu. For those who might not know, wudu is the standard ritual ablution a Muslim performs multiple times a day before their daily prayers.
Yes. The washers clean the hands, the face, the arms up to the elbows, the head, and the feet. They are literally preparing the deceased's body as if it is about to stand up and perform the prayer.
But there is a massive exception here, and this was an absolute aha moment for me when looking through these sorts
Press mouth and nose.
Yes. The standard daily pre-prayer washing for a living person includes taking water and rinsing the mouth, and sniffing water up to rinse the nose. It is a deeply ingrained part of the tradition. But the text explicitly says, for the dead, you completely skip rinsing the mouth and the nose.
And why do you think that omission is so significant?
Well, because it feels like a massive theological compromise. You are treating this body like a delicate, sacred artifact. You are performing this deeply religious, mandatory pre-prayer ritual. But by skipping the mouth and nose, it feels like you are doing an incomplete job. Like if a living person skipped their mouth and nose, their ablution would be questionable. Why deliberately alter a sacred ritual?
Here is where the text's profound, almost ruthless practicality shines through. It comes down to biology. Why do you rinse your mouth and nose when you are alive?
Because I have the muscle control to spit the water back out.
Precisely. The text states very clearly that the extraction of water from the deceased is impossible. If you pour water into the mouth or the nasal cavity of a corpse, it will pool there. It has nowhere to go. It might leak out hours later, completely ruining the clean shroud you just wrapped them in, or worse, it might travel down the throat and accelerate internal decay.
Wow.
Think about the weight of this legal decision. The ritual of rinsing the mouth and nose during wudu is a sunnah. It is a deeply held prophetic tradition. It is incredibly important to the faith. But here, medieval religious law explicitly tells its followers to abandon a sacred prophetic tradition for the sake of biological common sense. The ritual absolutely bows to the physical reality of the corpse. You do not force a ritual meant for the living onto a dead body if the body's mechanical functions cannot support it.
Ritual bowing to physical reality. That is such a powerful concept. It keeps the theology grounded in the physical world. It doesn't let religious idealism override the realities of decay.
Exactly. So after this modified ablution is complete, the full body washing begins. And the text gets incredibly specific about the chemistry, if you will, of this wash.
Right, the ingredients. They don't just use plain cold water out of a bucket. The text prescribes boiling water with specific natural cleansers. It mentions sud, which are lotus or jujube leaves, or hurd, which is a type of potash or plant-based soak.
We have to put ourselves in the mindset of medieval hygiene here. These weren't just random leaves. Sidra and hurd were the highest standard of antibacterial and astringent cleansers available in that era. Boiling the water extracts the active properties of these plants. It creates a genuine, thorough, hygienic, deep clean.
Right.
And the text even specifies using something called khaaatmah, an extract from the marshmallow plant, specifically for washing the head and the beard.
Marshmallow plant extract, what does that actually do?
It acts as a natural mucilage, essentially a detangler and a softening agent for hair. It helps remove dirt and oils without pulling or tearing the hair of the deceased. It ensures maximum cleanliness with maximum gentleness.
It's essentially a medieval botanical spa treatment for the deceased. The level of care is astonishing. But, true to form, the text immediately offers the backup plan. It says, if none of these botanical agents are available, plain water suffices to achieve the main goal.
It never lets the perfect become the enemy of the good. The primary legal and spiritual goal is purification. If you have the botanical agents, you use them to honor the deceased to the highest degree. If you are poor or traveling or in a place where those plants don't grow, plain water completely fulfills the legal requirement. No one is penalized for a lack of resources.
Now, regarding the actual physical process of pouring the water, there is a very specific sequence and a number system at play here. The text mandates an odd number of total washes, 3, 5, or 7 times.
The emphasis on odd numbers is a recurring theological motif. The text explicitly mentions the reasoning. God is odd and loves the odd.
Meaning 1.
Yes, in this context, odd refers to the concept of being one. Singular, indivisible, the absolute core tenet of Islamic monotheism, tawhid. By washing the body an odd number of times, even the physical act of pouring water becomes a reinforcement of the concept of the oneness of God.
They weave the theology right into the physical labor. The text outlines the sequence. They start by washing the left side of the body, rolling the deceased gently, and then washing the right side. And throughout this process, there is a physical maneuver the text mentions that is quite striking. It instructs the washers to gently wipe or press down on the abdomen of the deceased.
Ah, yes.
Pushing down on the stomach of a dead body in the middle of a bath. What is the purpose of that?
It is entirely pragmatic. It is to expel any remaining waste in the digestive tract. The text notes this is strictly to guard against the shrouds becoming soiled later on. The muscles have relaxed, the bowels might evacuate. It is better to force that to happen on the washing table where it can be cleaned immediately, rather than having it happen once the body is wrapped in pristine white cloth.
Okay, but wait, if waste exits the body during this pressing, doesn't that legally break the state of purity they just worked so hard to achieve?
That is a crucial jurisprudential question, and the text addresses it directly. The washers clean the specific area where the waste exited. But, and this is a massive legal relief for the family, the text states they do not have to restart the entire washing process, nor do they have to redo the wudu ablution they did at the beginning.
Which is wild because if you are a living person and you passed waste, your ablution is instantly voided. You would absolutely have to restart your wudu before you could pray.
Correct. For the living, the rules of purity are strict and reset easily. But for the dead, the text argues that the overarching obligation of the full body wash has been fulfilled. Again, look at the mercy shown to the living watchers. You do not trap a grieving family in an endless agonizing loop of rewashing a corpse just because the biology of the digestive tract is unpredictable. You clean the mess and you move forward.
That makes total sense. So the body has been thoroughly cleaned, the abdomen pressed, the botanical water poured, the body is completely pure. Now we move into the phase of preserving this state. The text talks about taking a separate dry cloth and drying the body completely so it doesn't get the burial shrouds wet. And then the application of perfumes. It specifically mentions hunnet, which is a type of embalming perfume applied to the head and the beard.
And then it dictates the application of camphor. Camphor is fascinating because it has a very strong, distinctive, almost medicinal scent. It acts as a mild natural preservative, and more importantly, in a pre-modern context, it acts as an insect repellent for the grave.
Oh, wow.
But the text doesn't just say rub camphor all over the body. It tells the washers exactly where to place it. It is applied specifically to the points of prostration.
The points of frustration. So we were talking about the forehead, the nose, the hands, the knees, and the feet. The specific parts of the human body that physically touch the ground when a Muslim is bowed in prayer.
Yes. The text says these specific anatomical parts are first in line for increased honor. It is a beautiful, deeply moving physical manifestation of a spiritual life. The jurisprudence is saying that the parts of your body that you used to submit to the divine in life, the parts that carried the physical weight of your faith, are the parts that receive the highest honor, the sweetest scent, and the most preservation in death.
I just love that visual of the physical body being mapped by its spiritual actions. But here's where the text takes a turn that I found really interesting. We've just spent all this time, all this meticulous effort washing the body. We've used marshmallow extract to soften the beard. We applied specific perfumes to specific joints. And then the text explicitly and strictly forbids combing the hair, cutting the nails, or trimming the beard.
Yes, it draws a hard line.
Why? Why leave the body ungroomed in that very specific way after you just worked so incredibly hard to clean it? I mean, in a modern funeral home, grooming is half the process. Doing their hair, clipping their nails, making them look presentable.
This prohibition represents one of the most profound philosophical shifts in the entire document. To explain this rule, the text brings in a historical quote from Aisha, the wife of the Prophet. When she witnessed people attempting to groom a deceased person, combing their hair, trimming their nails, she rebuked them, saying, "Why are you mishandling your dead?" Or in some translations which capture the severity of the Arabic better, "Why are you mutilating your dead?"
Mutilating. That is an incredibly strong word for simply trimming someone's fingernails or running a comb through their hair.
It is a severe word, and it is used intentionally to shock the listener into understanding the boundary that has been crossed. The text goes on to explain the philosophical reasoning behind this prohibition. Clipping nails, trimming beards, styling hair, these are actions of adornment. They are actions fundamentally tied to the living world. You cut your fingernails in life to prevent dirt from gathering under them, which is a hygienic necessity for an active person using their hands. You trim your beard or style your hair for social vanity to look presentable, sharp, or beautiful to your community.
Right. You are managing your appearance for the world. You are projecting an image.
But the dead are fundamentally past the need for social vanity. They are no longer part of the social fabric in a way that requires projection or adornment. To alter their physical form, to cut away pieces of them, even dead keratin like hair or nails, when they cannot consent and when it serves absolutely zero hygienic purpose for a body that is about to be placed under tons of dirt, is viewed by the jurisprudence as an unnecessary physical violation.
Wow. So the text is drawing a massive bright line between purity and vanity. Cleaning the body is about fundamental human dignity and spiritual purity. But grooming the body is about vanity and social performance. And the dead have permanently logged off from social performance.
Precisely. They are done with the theater of the world. To groom them is to treat the dead body like a doll to be styled for the comfort of the living, rather than a completed sovereign human life that should be laid to rest exactly in the state that it ended. Leave them be.
That is a fascinating boundary to establish. It completely reorients how you view the body. Okay, so we have a body that is washed, perfectly pure, perfumed with camphor, and left in its natural, unaltered state. That brings us to section 2 of our deep dive, the art of shrouding, or takfin, dressing for the final journey.
Yes, the shroud.
Before we get into the historical details, I want to pull you, the listener, into this for a second. Think about your own closet right now. Think about the clothes you put on every morning to project who you are to the world, the tailored suits to project power in a meeting, the specific brands to signal your wealth or your taste, the uniforms that state your profession. Think about how much of your identity is wrapped up in the fabric you wear. The text we are looking at takes all of that, every single societal function of clothing, and completely obliterates it.
The transition from the washing table to the shroud is the ultimate, uncompromising act of stripping away worldly status. You cannot take your wealth, your rank, or your style with you, and in this jurisprudence, you don't even try to pretend that you can. There are no pockets in a shroud.
Let's look at the materials and the method. We are not talking about dressing someone in their Sunday best. The standard mandated by the text is white cotton-like cloths. It specifically mentions sahuliya, which was a type of white cotton cloth from Yemen, known for being clean, simple, and of decent quality, but certainly not luxurious silk or embroidered fabric. And before the body even touches these cloths, the shrouds are prepared. The text says they are perfumed with incense an odd number of times.
The olfactory experience of this entire ritual is highly intentional. The incense on the cloth, the camphor on the skin, the boiled lotus leaves. Yes, it is about creating an atmosphere of sanctity, but practically, it is also about combating the natural odors of death, providing a sensory shield and comfort to the family members who are leaning over this body performing these final acts.
So we have these simple, incense-perfumed white cloths. The text breaks down the ideal wrapping method, and it separates the gold standard by gender. Let's look at the men first. The ideal standard for a man is exactly 3 pieces of cloth, an nizar, a lafafa, and a qamis. But I want to be clear here because the translations can be misleading. Can you explain what these actually are? Because when we hear shirt, we think of a button-down with a collar.
Right, and they're absolutely not tailored clothing. They are unsewn, simple, massive pieces of flat fabric. The izar is described as a waist wrapper, but it extends from the head all the way down to the foot. The lafafa is an outer wrapper, essentially a large rectangular sheet that encompasses the entire body, slightly longer than the izar. And the qamis, which translates to shirt, has no buttons, no zippers, no collar, and usually no sleeves. It is simply a large piece of cloth with a hole cut in the middle for the head to pass through, draping over the front and back of the body from the neck down to the feet.
It is the most rudimentary, elemental form of clothing imaginable. And the text details the exact physical mechanics of how to put this on. You lay out the outer wrapper first, then you lay the inner wrapper on top of it, then you put the shirt on the deceased, you place the body on the stack of wrappers, and then you fold them over, starting from the left side, bringing it over the body, and then the right side over the left.
And the text bothers to explain the reasoning for this specific left-then-right fold, because that mimics how one dresses in life. In many Eastern cultures, you wrap your garments folding the left under and the right over. It maintains the physical, daily habits of the living, even as the person is being packaged for the grave.
Packaged for the grave. That's exactly what it feels like. Because the text adds a practical note. If the cloths are a bit too short, or if there is a fear they might blow open in the wind or unravel while being carried through the streets, the text instructs the washers to physically tie knots at the ends, gathering the extra fabric above the head and below the feet and tying it off to secure the entire bundle.
It is entirely functional, securing the package to ensure the body is not exposed during transport. Now for women, the text outlines a slightly more complex system. Instead of the 3 cloths used for men, the gold standard for women is a 5-cloth system.
Right. It includes the wrappers and the shirt, but it adds 2 very specific items. A dir, which acts as a sort of dress, a kaimar, which is a head veil, and a special piece of cloth that is used specifically to bind the breasts.
Furthermore, the text dictates the handling of the woman's hair. During the washing, the hair was detangled. Now it is divided into 2 braids, and those braids are brought forward and placed resting on her chest, over the dress but beneath the outer wrappers.
I read this and I thought, okay, 3 cloths for men, 5 for women. Why the difference? If you are a modern listener, you might initially look at that and think it feels unequal or unnecessarily complicated. But how does the jurisprudence frame this difference? What is the underlying philosophy of the 5 cloths?
The jurisprudence frames it as a fierce, uncompromising protection of her dignity. The emphasis on the 5 cloths continues that intense focus on modesty we saw right at the beginning during the washing. The text argues logically that in life, within this religious framework, women observe higher degrees of physical covering and modesty in public spaces than men do. Therefore, that exact same level of dignity and covering must be afforded to her in death.
So it's about consistency.
Consistency and security. Think about the logistics of what is about to happen. This body is going to be carried out of a house, hoisted onto the shoulders of men, carried through public streets, and then physically lowered down into a deep hole in the earth. The binding cloth, the veil, the extra wrappers, it is all architected to ensure that as her body is moved, tilted, and jostled, there's absolutely zero chance of the fabric slipping and causing an inappropriate exposure of her form to the public. The community is protecting her modesty when she can no longer protect it herself.
It is a shield. It's incredibly protective. So you step back and look at this. Whether you were the sultan ruling an empire or the street sweeper cleaning the market, you are leaving this world wrapped in 3 to 5 pieces of cheap, unsewn white cotton. It is the ultimate equalizer.
It is. But as we have seen time and time again in this text, the medieval scholars never let their philosophical ideals blind them to the harsh economic realities of the world. They set up this beautiful gold standard of 3 cloths and 5 cloths. But then the text immediately pivots to outline what happens when resources are scarce. It establishes what we might call a hierarchy of shrouds.
And this is where the text shows its immense sociological awareness. Because funerals don't just happen during times of peace and economic prosperity. They happen during famines, they happen during plagues, they happen in the aftermath of horrific battles.
Precisely. The text states legally that if the ideal 3 garments are simply not possible or affordable for a man, 2 garments are acceptable. If the 5 garments are not possible for a woman, 3 will suffice.
And it goes even further than that to comfort the impoverished. It doesn't just give a legal ruling. It tells a specific historical story to hammer the point home. The story of Musab ibn Umair.
Yes, this is a very famous, very poignant historical memory in the Islamic tradition. Musab ibn Umair was a companion of the Prophet. Before his conversion to Islam, he was a young man of immense wealth and high status in Mecca. He was famous for wearing the most luxurious, expensive, custom-tailored clothing in the city. He was the definition of high society. But he sacrificed all of that wealth for his faith, and he was eventually martyred on the battlefield at the Battle of Uhud.
And the text recalls the scene of his burial. The early Muslim community at that time was so utterly impoverished, so depleted by war, that when they went to bury this formerly wealthy man, they only had a single, terribly short piece of rough cloth to use as his shroud.
The historical account notes the heartbreaking logistics. The cloth was so short that if they pulled it up to cover his head, his feet were completely exposed to the elements. And if they pulled it down to cover his feet, his head and face were exposed.
So what did they do?
The Prophet instructed them to use the cloth to cover his head and his upper body, and to go gather sweet-smelling grassy grass from the field, and heap the grass over his bare feet to cover them.
They buried a hero of their community in half a sheet on a pile of grass.
Exactly. And the jurisprudence uses this powerful emotional historical memory to establish a permanent legal category, the shroud of necessity. It formally decrees that in times of extreme poverty, duress, or war, a single piece of cloth, even one that doesn't fit perfectly, is entirely legally and spiritually sufficient for burial.
If we pull back and look at the bigger picture of this law, it is a profound act of psychological mercy. It ensures that the surviving community doesn't bear an impossible financial or emotional burden. Imagine being a dirt-poor family who has just lost their father. The religious law does not say to them, go into crippling debt to buy 3 pristine white sheets, or your father's soul is in jeopardy. It says, 1 sheet is enough, use what you have. The greatest heroes among us were buried in less.
It separates the essential from the ideal. The essential duty is covering the body out of respect. The ideal is the 3 or 5 layers. By legally defining both, the law completely removes the guilt and shame from poverty. It proves the law is meant to be adaptable and humane, not rigid and punitive.
Okay, so the body is washed, perfectly pure. It is shrouded, stripped of all worldly identifiers, wrapped in absolute equality, knots tied at the ends. The intensely private physical preparation inside the home is now complete. We are crossing a major threshold here. We are moving to Section 3 of our deep dive, the collective goodbye. The private family tragedy now becomes a public, communal obligation. We are shifting our focus to the janazah, the funeral prayer.
This shift from the private bedchamber to the public square introduces an entirely new set of jurisprudential concerns. In the private room, the law was concerned with hygiene, modesty, and the mechanics of fabric. Out in the public square, the law suddenly has to manage social order, political authority, and the dynamics of a crowd. And the primary question that arises immediately is one of authority. Who gets to stand at the front of the congregation and lead this incredibly important prayer over the body?
Right. And the text gives a very strict, uncompromising hierarchy of exactly who is entitled to lead. And I have to be honest, when I read this list, it completely threw me.
It does that to a lot of people.
It says the sultan, or the supreme ruler, if he is present, is the absolute first choice. He has the right above everyone else. If the ruler isn't there, then the qadi, the local judge or magistrate, steps up. If the judge isn't there, then the imam, the religious leader of the local neighborhood, leads. And only then, if none of those civic and religious officials are present, does the right fall to the wali, the actual guardian or closest male family member of the deceased. Okay, I have to push back on this hard. The mayor or the local judge gets to step up and lead the funeral prayer over a man's own father, over a man's own son. That seems incredibly cold and impersonal for such a tragic, intimate moment. In modern Western culture, the family dictates absolutely everything about a funeral. They choose the speakers, they lead the procession. Why on earth would medieval law take that profound right away from the grieving family and give it to a politician?
It is a massive culture clash, and you are highlighting a profound difference in worldview. You are looking at the funeral strictly through the lens of individual personal grief. The medieval jurisprudence is looking at the funeral through the lens of the social fabric and political stability.
But what does political stability have to do with burying my dad?
In the classical Islamic context, once a body is brought out into the public square, the funeral prayer is no longer just a family saying goodbye. It becomes a fard kifaya, a communal obligation. The entire community is responsible for the burial. If a ruler, a sultan or a caliph or a high judge attends a funeral, they are not just there as a friend. They represent the state, the collective body of believers, the ultimate authority in the land.
So it's about acknowledging the chain of command, even in death.
It is about maintaining social harmony and acknowledging established authority to prevent public discord. The text explicitly spells out its reasoning. Bypassing a present ruler to let a regular citizen, even if it is the son of the deceased, lead, a massive public gathering would be seen as a direct insult. It would be a public degradation of the ruler's authority, which, in a medieval context, could spark political friction, rumors of rebellion, or communal division.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see the stakes now. If the caliph shows up to your dad's funeral to pay his respects, and you step in front of him to lead the prayer, the crowd doesn't think, oh, what a loving son. The crowd thinks he just publicly usurped the caliph's authority. It's a public slap in the face to the government.
Exactly. The text prioritizes the stability of the community and respect for recognized authority in public spaces over individual family privilege. The grief is private, but the funeral is public.
But does the family just have to swallow that? Do they lose all ownership of their loved one's funeral just because a VIP shows up?
Not entirely. The law is nuanced. It provides a pressure valve. It states that the family, the wali, does have the underlying foundational right to the deceased. This means the wali can explicitly give permission to someone else to lead, so the respectful protocol would be for the son to publicly defer to the ruler, officially granting him permission to lead, thereby honoring the ruler while maintaining his own rights as the guardian.
Ah, okay.
Furthermore, the text outlines a remedy. If a stranger or a leader steps up and leads the prayer without the family's permission, the general obligation is fulfilled, but the family legally retains the right to pray over the body again, by themselves, to fulfill their personal right.
Okay, so the state gets the public spectacle, but the family still owns the private right. That makes more sense. Let's move from the politics to the actual mechanics of this prayer, because if you've never seen an Islamic funeral prayer, it looks very different from the daily prayers. There is no bowing down. There is no prostrating with your forehead on the ground. The entire prayer is done standing up.
Yes, the physical mechanics are unique. It is anchored by 4 takbirs, which is the phrase Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. Each time the imam says this phrase, it initiates a different specific phase of the prayer.
The text breaks the 4 parts down perfectly. The first takbir is followed by praising God. The second takbir is followed by sending blessings upon the Prophet. The third takbir is really the emotional core of the ritual. It is the moment of praying directly, specifically for the soul of the deceased, asking for their forgiveness, and praying for all Muslims. And the fourth takbir is a final pause, followed by the conclusion of peace, turning the head to the right and left.
It is relatively short, it is intensely direct, and it is entirely focused on the concept of intercession. You are not worshiping the dead. You are standing there as a united community, physically acting as a wall of advocates for the soul of the person lying in front of you. You are pleading their case to the divine.
And speaking of standing in front of the body, the text is very particular about the physical positioning of the imam leading the prayer. He doesn't just stand anywhere.
No, the placement is deeply symbolic. The text dictates that if the deceased is a man, the imam stands aligned with the head or the chest of the body. If the deceased is a woman, the imam stands aligned with the middle of her body.
Let's unpack the reasoning there. Why the chest for a man?
The text provides a beautiful metaphorical justification. It says the chest is the physical location of the heart, and theologically the heart is the seat of the light of faith. It is where belief resides. Therefore, the imam standing aligned with the heart is a physical gesture of intercession based on the person's faith. He is aligning himself with the best part of the man.
And for the woman, why does the imam shift down to stand at the middle of her body?
It continues that relentless, uncompromising theme of modesty we've discussed from the very beginning. By standing at the widest part of her body, the imam's physical presence acts as a screen, further obscuring the shape and dimensions of her shrouded body from the rows and rows of congregants standing behind him. Even in the middle of a prayer, her physical privacy is guarded.
Incredible. Every single movement, every placement of a foot has a philosophy behind it. Now, regarding where this mass gathering takes place, we are talking about a deeply religious prayer led by religious figures invoking God of mercy. So naturally, you hold this inside the mosque, right? The holiest building in town.
Wrong. And this is another rule that surprises many people. The text states clearly that it is legally forbidden, or at the very least severely disliked, to bring the body into a regular mosque to hold the funeral prayer.
Which feels completely counterintuitive. It's the spiritual center of the community. Where else would you pray for a soul?
You have to remember how the jurisprudence views the physical space of a mosque. A mosque is fundamentally a space for the living. It is a sanctuary built for the daily, prescribed physical prayers of living bodies. When evaluating bringing a corpse inside, the text immediately brings up the concept of physical contamination.
It's that harsh reality of the corpse again.
Exactly. Bodies leak. A corpse might expel fluids. It carries odors. The beard is carried on might track in dirt from the streets. Bringing a dead body inside risks the physical soiling of a sacred space where people are meant to place their foreheads on the ground. Therefore, the law establishes a firm physical boundary between the domain of the living, which is the interior of the mosque, and the domain of the dead.
Keep the dead with the dead, keep the living with the living. So where do they do it?
The funeral prayer is almost always held in an outdoor courtyard, a public square, or a specific designated open-air area near the graveyard called a musalla. The sky is the roof.
Okay, I want to pivot now to a part of the text that I found to be the most emotionally devastating, but also intellectually fascinating part of the entire document. We've established all these incredibly strict rules for the stand of death. But life isn't standard. The text spends a significant amount of time dealing with edge cases, the complex, messy, tragic realities where the standard rules suddenly have to navigate extreme heartbreak or severe social tension.
Jurisprudence is always tested most severely at its margins. How a legal system handles the anomalies tells you everything about its true values.
Let's talk about the most heartbreaking anomaly, infants and stillbirths. The text has a very specific legal term it introduces here, Allah.
Yes. Ilal literally refers to raising the voice, but in this specific legal context, it refers to a newborn baby showing any physical sign of life upon birth. Most commonly, this is identified by the baby crying.
The text states that if a baby is born and it cries, even just a single brief cry before dying, that sound triggers the entire massive sequence we have been talking about for the last half hour. The baby is given a name, it is meticulously washed with the botanical water, it is wrapped in the white shrouds, and the entire community stands in lines in the public square and prays the full janazah prayer over this tiny body.
Because in the eyes of the law, that single cry, that moment of ilal, is the undeniable legal and physical proof of life. By taking a breath and making a sound in this world, that infant achieved the full, unquestionable status of a living human being within the community. And therefore, they are entitled to the exact same full rights of the dead as the caliph or the imam. They are mourned as a full participant in the human experience, no matter how briefly they were here.
It validates their existence, but what if they don't cry? What if there is no breath? What if it is a stillbirth?
The text handles the tragedy of a stillbirth with a delicate, almost agonizing balance between theological logic and human compassion. If the infant is born completely lifeless, with no sign of ilal, the text dictates that they are not given the public funeral prayer.
And I have to be honest, when I read that, it sounded incredibly cruel at first. Like, the community is officially ignoring the parents' devastating loss. Like, your baby didn't cry, so we aren't going to pray for them.
It absolutely sounds harsh to modern ears, but you have to look at the theological reasoning driving the law. Remember what we said the funeral prayer actually is. It is an intercession. It is a community pleading with God to forgive the sins of the deceased. A stillborn infant has never drawn breath in this world. They have absolutely zero sins. They are considered fundamentally pure. They do not need the intercession of the community because there is nothing to forgive. To pray for their forgiveness would be theologically nonsensical.
Okay, the logic tracks. But what about the body? Are they just discarded?
Absolutely not. And this is where the compassion enters. While the public prayer is withheld for theological reasons, the physical care of the body is maintained. The text explicitly states that the stillborn infant is still gently washed. They are respectfully wrapped in a clean piece of cloth. The text uses a beautiful phrase to justify this. It is done as an honoring of the children of Adam.
An honoring of the children of Adam, that is deeply moving.
It is. The law acknowledges the tragedy. It gives the physical form the dignity of a human being. They are handled with care. They are buried with respect. But the theology refuses to force a ritual of life, the prayer of intercession, onto an entity that never truly entered the worldly realm to require a formal exit from it.
It honors the humanity of the form without compromising the strict logic of the theology. It is so incredibly precise.
Precise is exactly the word. It compartmentalizes the emotional need from the theological requirement. Now, if you want to see that compartmentalization pushed to its absolute limit, look at the other major edge case the text tackles, the non-Muslim relative.
Yes. This is fascinating. What happens if a non-Muslim person dies, and their only surviving family member, their only legal guardian, is a practicing Muslim? The text doesn't deal in hypotheticals here. It cites a very famous real-world historical example to set the precedent. It looks at Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, and his handling of his own father, Abu Talib.
Abu Talib is a massive figure in Islamic history. He protected the Prophet for years, but he died without ever officially accepting Islam. So when he died, his son Ali was faced with a profound dilemma.
It is a scenario absolutely fraught with tension. Put yourself in that son's shoes. On one hand, you have the absolute, undeniable human and filial duty of a son to care for his father's body. But on the other hand, you have the strict, exclusionary religious boundaries of Islamic funeral rites, which are designed explicitly and exclusively for believers of the faith. How on earth does the medieval law bridge that massive gap?
It bridges the gap by totally and ruthlessly compartmentalizing the physical duty of a son from the spiritual ritual of a believer. The text states unequivocally that the Muslim son must wash his father, shroud him, and bury him. He cannot simply abandon the body to the elements. That would be a failure of his human duty. But the way he is instructed to perform these actions is completely legally altered to strip them of any religious significance.
Right. Let's look at the washing first. The son has to wash the father, but the text says the body is washed, quote, technically treated as washing a soiled garment.
That phrasing is key. Washing a soiled garment. It removes all the sacred spiritual intent we discussed earlier. There is no wudu ablution. There is no adherence to odd numbers. There are no botanical extracts or camphor on the points of prostration. The act is reduced entirely to a physical, hygienic necessity. It is sanitation, pure and simple. It is not sanctification.
And the shrouding. We spent all that time talking about the 3 white cloths for a man.
None of that applies. No specific number of wrappers, no incense. The text simply says the body is wrapped in a cloth. Any cloth that covers the form will do.
And the burial itself might be the starkest contrast of all. The text explicitly says they dig a hole to dispose of the body, but they do not use the specific architecture of the Muslim grave. They do not align the father's body to face the Qibla. And most shockingly, the text actually uses verbs indicating the body is dropped or thrust into the hole, rather than gently, lovingly lowered with religious incantations.
Which, again, we must read impartially as a legal and theological mechanism, not merely as cruelty. The text is carving out a necessary middle ground in a deeply pluralistic society. It is saying to the son, you are a human being, so you must dispose of your father's remains with basic physical decency. You cannot let a human body rot in the street. But you absolutely cannot apply the specific sacred markers, prayers, and architectural honors of the Islamic faith to someone who consciously rejected that faith in life. To do so would make a mockery of the ritual itself.
It fulfills the human duty of disposal while fiercely, almost aggressively, guarding the boundaries of the religious ritual. It is a cold but incredibly clear logical line. And that harsh reality of the burial brings us to the final act of this massive process. We are moving into Section 4, the final return.
The ending.
The prayer in the public square is finished. The crowd is gathered around the body. The final physical act remains transporting the deceased to the graveyard and placing them into the earth.
And just like the washing we discussed an hour ago, the transporting of the body is a deeply physical, deeply communal act. The text details the exact method of carrying the bier, which is the wooden stretcher that holds the shrouded body.
It says the bier must be carried by its four corners by men. And there's a very specific mandated rotational method for carrying it. You don't just grab a handle at your house and walk all the way to the cemetery. You start by carrying the front right pole, then after a while you move to the back right pole, then you rotate to the front left, and finally to the back left. Why this complex musical chairs rotation while carrying a dead body?
For two very important reasons: to share the spiritual honor and to share the physical burden. In this tradition, carrying the dead is considered a highly meritorious act, a profound good deed. By constantly rotating the pallbearers, you allow as many men in the community as possible to physically participate in this final act of service. It prevents a few strong relatives from monopolizing the good deed. And practically, a human body is heavy. The graveyard might be miles away. Rotating prevents fatigue and ensures the body is never dropped.
It makes the whole community literally physically shoulder the weight of death. And as they are carrying this weight, they aren't walking slowly. If you picture a Western funeral procession, you picture cars driving at a crawl, somber music, a very slow, mournful pace. The text mandates the exact opposite. It dictates a swift pace. The instruction is walking swiftly, but not at a trot or a run.
The jurisprudence relies on a saying of the Prophet, who, when asked about the proper pace for a funeral procession, replied, anything less than a trot. The philosophy driving this speed is wonderfully stark. You are carrying a soul to its final destination. Do not delay it. If the person was righteous, you should hurry them to the reward that is waiting for them. If the person was not righteous, they are a burden of sin, so you should hurry to get that burden off your own shoulders.
So move with purpose.
Yes, move swiftly, but do not run, because running or trotting would cause the bier to bounce, it would jostle the body, potentially unravel the shrouds, and completely strip away the dignity of the procession. Swift, but smooth.
Swift, but dignified. And when the swift procession finally reaches the gates of the graveyard, there is a point of crowd etiquette that I found fascinating. The text strictly mandates that attendees shouldn't sit down anywhere in the graveyard until the body is physically lowered from the men's shoulders and placed on the ground.
Yes. Everyone in the crowd must remain standing. Think about the psychological effect of this rule. It ensures the community remains literally standing at attention for the deceased. You do not relax. You do not wander off to casually sit on a nearby tombstone and chat with your neighbor while the deceased is still hovering above the earth on the shoulders of the bearers. You are forced to remain fully engaged in the physical reality of what is happening until the absolute last moment when gravity takes over.
Which brings us to the grave itself, the actual architecture of the earth. When you and I picture a grave, we almost certainly picture a rectangular hole dug 6 feet straight down with flat walls. The text details an architectural method that is far more complex and purposeful. It contrasts two types of graves, a lod versus a shack.
A shack is exactly what you just described. A simple trench or ditch dug straight down into the middle of the earth like a standard modern grave. The text mentions that this is used particularly in areas where the soil is too soft and sandy to hold a shape, but it vastly prefers and recommends the lod.
And a lod is a niche. It is a piece of underground engineering. You dig the main shaft straight down, but then at the very bottom, you carve horizontally into the side of the wall, specifically the wall that faces the Qibla. You hollow it out. It's like creating a little underground shelf or a cave at the bottom of the hole.
Yes. The body is not just laid flat at the bottom of the open shaft where dirt will be shoveled directly onto its face. The body is placed deep into that carved-out side niche. The brilliant physics of the lod is that it provides a natural, solid roof of undug earth over the body. It creates a protected chamber.
The text details the exact method of moving the body into this chamber. The body is brought down into the main shaft from the Qibla side, and the person who physically takes the body and pushes it gently into the side niche is required to say a very specific phrase, "In the name of God and on the religion of the messenger of God."
Think about the symmetry of this moment. It is the final verbal stamp on the person's existence. You enter the active dying process by being prompted by your family to say the Shahada on your deathbed. And now you are placed into the earth with the community declaring that you belong to that exact same faith. The loop is closed.
And once the body is safely inside that side niche, deep in the earth, the final physical touches are applied. The body is gently turned onto its right side, facing the Qibla. This completes the physical orientation that began the moment they started dying in their bed. And then remember those knots we tied in the shroud back at the house so the fabric wouldn't unravel during the swift walk?
The text instructs that those knots are finally carefully untied.
I found this detail so incredibly beautiful. It is such a small physical action, but it carries so much weight. Why untie them now?
Because the pragmatic fear that required the knots, the fear of the cloth spreading in the wind or exposing the body to the crowd, is completely gone. They are surrounded by the deep earth. They are safe from the eyes of the world. Untying the knots is a profound physical symbol of release. The tension is gone. The journey from the deathbed to the grave is over. The package has been delivered to its final destination. Let the bindings loose.
A physical symbol of absolute release. Wow. And while this release is happening down in the grave, there's one more detail about modesty that happens up on the surface. The text says that if the deceased is a woman, a large cloth is held up by the men, acting as a tent or a screen over the open grave while the niche is being filled and sealed.
It is incredibly consistent. Even deep inside a hole in the ground, surrounded by her community, physically obscured by the earth, she is shielded from view from above until the very last brick is placed. The jurisprudence never, ever drops the thread of her modesty. It protects her to the very last second.
Which brings us to the actual sealing of the niche. They don't just start shoveling dirt into the main shaft. They have to seal the opening of the lad, that side cave, to protect the body from the falling dirt.
Yes, they build a wall across the opening of the niche. And the specific materials used to build this wall are intensely debated and heavily regulated in the text. The jurisprudence dictates using adobe, which are unbaked mud bricks or natural reeds.
The text uses the Arabic word laban, referring to these unbaked, sun-dried mud bricks.
But the text specifically hates, and I mean it vehemently despises, the use of baked, fired bricks or finished wood to seal the grave.
Why? A fired brick is stronger, wood is sturdier. Why is the medieval law so incredibly against using a stronger baked brick to protect the body?
Because of what a baked brick represents. This is perhaps the most profound, devastating philosophical argument in the entire text regarding human arrogance and material wealth. What do human beings use baked bricks and finished wood for?
We use them to build houses, mansions, palaces, permanent structures that are meant to last for generations.
Exactly. They are the materials of the living. They are the materials we use to build grand structures, to display our wealth, to conquer nature, and to create an illusion of permanence. The text notes that bringing these specific materials into the grave contradicts and insults the entire fundamental philosophy of what the grave actually is.
Because the grave isn't a house.
The grave is a place of decay. It is a place of returning to the elements, of completely abandoning worldly wealth and the illusion of permanence. The unbaked mud brick, the Laban, will naturally soften, crumble, and dissolve back into the earth, just exactly as the human body behind it will dissolve. It participates in the natural cycle.
But a baked brick fights the cycle.
Right. A fired brick resists the earth. It tries to artificially hold back the inevitable decay. The text even mentions a superstitious element. Baked bricks require fire to make them in kilns, and bringing an element of fire into the grave is seen as a terrible omen for a soul facing the afterlife. But philosophically, the jurisprudence is demanding that you accept the reality of the earth. You came from mud, You are sealed with mud, you return to mud. Do not bring your arrogant building materials into the realm of decay.
No luxury condos in the graveyard. And that philosophy of absolute natural simplicity extends to the surface of the grave as well. Once the niche is sealed with mud bricks and the main shaft is shoveled full of dirt, the text dictates exactly how the top of the grave should look. It shouldn't be flattened out into a perfect geometric square. It shouldn't be paved over or covered in imported marble. It says the earth should simply be mounted up over the grave like a camel's hump.
The term is tasnim, mounding the earth up naturally.
Yes, making it just high enough to be visible so people know it is a grave and don't accidentally walk on it or disrespect it, but keeping it entirely natural. Just a simple mound of loose dirt that will inevitably eventually settle, erode, and weather away with the rain and the wind.
It is the final, perfect visual reminder of everything we have discussed today. Simplicity, natural order, the total uncompromising rejection of human vanity.
And that mound of dirt brings us to the end of the text and the end of our deep dive today. We have traced this incredibly detailed, meticulously choreographed journey from the final frantic breath in the bedroom, through the intensely intimate washing and the simple white shrouding, out into the public square for the mass intercession of the prayer, and finally down into the unbaked, dissolving earth.
When you step back and synthesize all of this information, all of these incredibly specific rules about herbs and knots and bricks, you see a text that masterfully weaves together three massive enduring themes of the human experience. First, absolute equality. The billionaire and the beggar both leave the world wrapped in 3 pieces of cheap, unsewn white cotton placed in a hole in the dirt. Second, immense dignity. The gentle detangling of the beard with marshmallow extract, the perfuming of the points of prostration with camphor, the fierce, uncompromising protection of a woman's modesty, even in the pitch black of the grave. And third, community obligation. The shared physical burden of carrying the bier, the mass intercession of the prayer, the way the law consistently prioritizes social cohesion and public harmony over individual preference.
And this is exactly where I want to connect this ancient text back to you, the listener, right now in the modern world. Why should you, sitting in your car or walking your dog, care about the minutiae of medieval Islamic burial law? Because observing this level of meticulous, philosophical, hands-on care forces us to hold up a very uncomfortable mirror to how our own modern cultures handle death. Think about it. If you have planned a funeral recently, you know that we live in a society that largely sanitizes, outsources, and commercializes the end of life. When someone dies, we immediately hand the body over to strangers. We pay professionals to pump the body full of toxic chemicals and apply makeup to make our loved ones look like they are just peacefully sleeping, denying the reality of death.
Right.
We spend thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars on plush mahogany caskets with brass handles. We lower those caskets into reinforced concrete vaults and manicured lawns so the natural earth never actually touches the wood, let alone the body. We spend billions of dollars as a society trying to distance ourselves from the stark physical reality of decay that this medieval text embraces head-on.
We use the baked bricks. We spend our lives and our deaths trying to build permanent houses in a place that is fundamentally designed for decay.
Exactly. We are obsessed with the baked bricks. And so I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We have spent the last hour watching how this jurisprudence methodically, ruthlessly strips away every single marker of wealth, status, and vanity. It returns the human being to the earth in a few pieces of unsewn cloth and dissolving mud bricks, utterly, undeniably equal to everyone else. If you knew, deep in your bones, that this was exactly how your physical story would end, stripped of every accessory, every title, completely equal to the person you consider beneath you and the person you consider above you, how might it change the way you value the baked bricks and fancy garments you are spending so much time, money, and emotional energy chasing in your life right now?